Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Let's just start by making sure you all can hear me and see my presentation. If you could just send me a quick little message saying, yep, I can hear you. Everything looks good. Oh, great. I'm hearing or seeing yeses. So thank you so much. Welcome to the April webinar. This is the Trifecta of TRIPHALA, GI, weight, and immune health. My name is Dr. Juliette Sweet. I'm a naturopathic doctor and Ayurvedic practitioner. And this webinar is sponsored by Rebel Herbs. So I'm also the Director of Clinical Education for Rebel Herbs, an Ayurvedic herbal company. And I'm very excited to bring Ayurveda to all different types of healthcare practitioners, and really the way that all of the formulas that and herbs that I usually talk about um, work is that they are helpful for anyone depending on their constitution, and they're known as rasayanas. So we'll get more into that. But this is, like I said, sponsored by Rebel Herbs. And the great thing is that we are doing continuing education credits. So far we have approval for naturopathic doctors and also Ayurvedic practitioners, so the PACE credit. And we're currently working on trying to get more practitioners to have these webinars accredited for them as well. So chiropractors, doctors of Oriental medicine, we're trying to figure out that process as well so that we can reach more practitioners. And if you have any questions, there's my email. It'll be there at the end as well, and you'll probably get an email thanking you for joining the webinar, and you can always reply to that or send me an email if you have any questions or concerns. I know that a lot of the entities such as AANP and Rebel Herbs and other companies are working with a skeleton crew. So we hope that within 30 days you'll get your certificate. But if you're in a situation where you're trying to renew your license and you need it sooner, just send me an email, and we can make sure that that's sort of expedited for you. I know how that will be, I know how that can be when it comes to trying to get all those credits in, especially with a lot of the conferences canceled and stuff. So great. So these are the Ayurvedic doshas, and they consist of different elements. We have all of these elements are in our body, and we are the microcosm of the macrocosm. So all these elements are elements in nature, and it can be kind of similar to Chinese medicine. There is some crossover there, but basically Vata is air and ether, and so you can think about really wind and space and what does that look like in the body? What does that look like, when it comes to affecting us? I don't know if you've ever had an experience where it's been super windy outside. It's spring in New Mexico right now, and the wind is just really intense. But it can almost just create this feeling of, anxiety or like, get me out of here, and just sort of needing to be more calm and grounded, which is what kapha is about. So kapha is our earth and water. It's stable, it's steady, it's grounded. And every dosha has positive qualities as well as sort of these qualities that happen when it's out of balance. And so that's sort of how we look at individuals and help them, bring them back into balance. Pitta is fire and water, and that's really sort of metabolism in the body and digestion and how we can transform things in the body. And so we kind of look at that element as sort of our ability to not only transform food into tissues and all of that, but also life. We're being dealt a pretty challenging situation right now. And if you have strong Agni, we call it, or digestive fire, you're able to process life, experiences, emotions, all of those things. And so that's sort of our Pitta. And it's also passion, and it's also drive. But Pitta individuals, if it's out of balance, there can be too much heat, so inflammation, and also maybe quick to anger. And we'll kind of get more into that as we talk about this awesome formula that is very tridoshic, or it affects all the doshas. So this is the basis of the sort of, we talk about in Ayurvedic medicine, not only do we have these doshas, these elements, these qualities inside of us, but they govern certain areas of the body. And then also their main primary place in the body, we call it their home, is really the digestive tract and the lungs. So basically from mouth to anus, but also um, affecting the lungs as well. And, we talk about how, especially with our panchakarma, which is our detoxification or cleansing therapies, if the doshas have left their home and they're creating havoc in the body, how do we bring them back? And so, as you know, the GI system is just so important for health. And as Hippocrates says, all disease begins in the gut. And so, no matter what integrative medicine you're doing, you're probably focusing on GI health and how important that is for all of the other systems in the body. And so this is kind of the basis or foundation for the formula we're going to be talking about, because well, let me get to the next slide. There's 3 doshas, as we just mentioned, vata, pitta, kapha, and then 3 parts of the GI. So we have the upper GI, like the fundus of the stomach, and actually the lungs are kind of considered part of that piece. And then we have our small intestine and we have our large intestine. So you have 3 parts of the GI and then 3 fruits. And so the 3 fruits, so Triphala is Trifala, so that's really, it just means 3 fruits. And out of all the different formulas, I do a lot of Ayurvedic herbal medicine, and this is considered medicine, but in some ways, these are 3 fruits, and they're also considered food. And so Amalaki is our Amla Phyllanthus imblica, and then Harataki terminalia chabula and Bibitaki terminalia bellerica. These are all part of a similar family. They're all trees that grow in India and other places, but really the basis for this formula is taking these 3 fruits in equal parts and having it as a churna, so ground up, or taking it in capsule form. There's lots of different ways you can take it, and we can talk about that too. But those are the 3 fruits. And so, as I mentioned, it's food. And so let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food, as Hippocrates also said. It's a tridoshic tonic. So, each herb is actually tridoshic. Each fruit is helpful for all the doshas, but it's more specific to certain parts of the GI. And so we'll go through each fruit and talk about how it's affecting that part of the GI and that dosha in particular. And then you've probably heard me talk about rasayanas if you've been on any of the webinars before. And like I mentioned in the beginning, it's sort of the basis for what I like to talk about, because these are really rejuvenative tonics that are helpful for everybody, depending, it doesn't matter if they're vata, pitta, or kapha. It's balancing, it's helpful to rejuvenate, it's immunomodulating, it's helpful for stress, it's helpful for all of the organ systems really, and the blood, and it helps to purify and cleanse. And so that's kind of the basis of this formula. So I'm going to go in order from the upper part of the GI, the middle part of the GI, and then the lower part of the GI. And so we're going to talk about Bibitaki first. And this is, of course, we're using the fruit. The taste is very astringent and also sweet. There's a lot of different constituents, but as you might notice, there's a lot of different acids that are antioxidant, and then tannic acid, so a little bit of kind of tightening and drying. We have different clinical uses. So in general, if you're thinking about the fundus of the stomach and then the lungs, anything that is going to create congestion in the body, this Bibitaki can be used for that. So we're looking at cough, asthma. If the energy in the body is going the wrong way, so we talk about prana, which is our life force, and it's really related to vata in some ways because it's movement. If the prana in our body is going the wrong way, as it might be with vomiting or anorexia, people that are unable to really eat, and it can help to re-regulate that energy to start moving downward. Also, if the energy is moving too quickly downward, such as in diarrhea, it will help with regulating that. It's also a brain tonic, and it can be considered laxative, not a stimulative laxative or any sort of addictive laxative that the body can kind of start depending on. It's more just, hey, there's fiber, it's fruit, we're moving things in the right direction. That being said, you know, we do not recommend Triphala in general or any of the herbs in pregnancy. You don't want to create too much of a strong downward movement. So Bibataki in general, we're looking at kapha excess. So that's congestion, as I mentioned, of any kind. Sluggish digestion, so things just not moving. If you're feeling really tired after eating, maybe you're not hungry, maybe you're having nausea, that sort of thing. When we look at the tongue for kapha excess, there's going to be a white coat. You'll also notice maybe teeth marks on the sides, sort of this congested tongue. And then there can be mucus in the stools as well. And then mentally, we have depression and mental lethargy. So one of my teachers, KP Kalsa, used to talk about like kapha is like a boulder and you're trying to move this boulder. Once it gets moving, it's gonna go, but just getting it to move is really the challenge. So I have a few questions about if I'm going to be making the slides available. Absolutely. I can make the slides available to you. I'll send out an email, and then I can also, this is recorded, so I can also send you the recording, or it'll be available on our website, rebelherbs.com. And so you can review it if you want to, but I can absolutely send out a PDF of the slides after we're done. Okay. So the next herb we're going to talk about is amla or amalaki, and this has actually been in quite a few webinars I've done. It's such an amazing fruit and antioxidant, and it's great for so many different things: immune modulation, inflammation. I did a webinar on healthy skin and how amla is used for that, because it is really helpful with wound healing, detoxification, and it's helpful for the liver. So we look at amla as sort of this holy grail when it comes to immune health and antioxidants and just being modulating in that way. It's a very sour little fruit. I got to taste a fresh amla in India. They also candy it and do all sorts of different things with it. But basically, you know, it can be helpful with blood sugar regulation. So if your patients are on type 2 diabetes medication, watch for that. And then it is very astringent and very tonifying. So that's why it's helpful for ulcers or GI bleeding and that sort of thing, or heavy menstrual bleeding. But, you know, if someone's on blood clotting medications, you just want to be careful. And most of the time, you know, you're going to need a lot to have those effects, but we just want to be safe, right? And be aware of those things. So amla in general is useful for the body of the stomach, so the lower part where we talk about how agni or digestive fire is there. So that's our pitta and our, you know, our metabolism, and it should be fiery so that we can transform all of our food into all of our tissues and, you know, energy in the body. But if pitta is high, as I mentioned, you're going to have increased inflammation, and that might look like acid reflux, ulcers, any sort of GI bleeding. If there's too much fire, metabolism is going too quickly, you're going to have diarrhea, any sort of acrid symptoms. If we look at a person that has high pitta or a pitta imbalance, the tip of the tongue will be red. There might even be like ulcerations on the tongue. It's just saying, hey, there's like so much heat here, we don't know what to do. And oftentimes, as I just mentioned about having amla in our skin webinar, is that the heat has to get out somehow. And so oftentimes the inflammation will show up in the skin because it's just trying to get out of the body. So diarrhea, skin, eczema, and hives, and other things that can happen with the skin as well. Usually, Pitta individuals can be quick to anger, but there's also some irritability. And really, that's liver issues, so stagnation or just kind of overactive. And if that is also happening, we're going to see jaundice, so yellowing of the eyes or skin. So the next herb I want to talk about is the harataki. And harataki is, I love this. There's a great book about Ayurvedic herbs, The Way of Ayurvedic Herbs by K.P. Khalsa and Michael Tierra. And they talk about Harataki, so Har is Shiva, and it's really named after Shiva, the Hindu god. And so it's really bringing fearlessness in the face of death and disease and purifying the mind of attachments. And so this, very powerful multi-use herb is talked about. Once again, we're using the fruit. It's sort of heating. And really, we're thinking about the lower GI, so the colon, and that's sort of the vata, the air and ether elements. Vata is also cold, and so the heating temperature is going to be helpful for treating that imbalance. It has all tastes except salty, but especially astringent and sweet. The different acids are listed here, and as you can tell, some of them are similar in all of the different fruits, but this one has specifically anthraquinone, and those can be considered laxatives. So not in an osmotic way where they're bringing in water, or a cathartic way, such as like using senna where it's sort of forcing contractions. It doesn't work in that way. It's not a very like I said, your bowels are not going to get addicted to Triphala as they can in some other herbs that are more forceful, or over-the-counter laxatives. So it works on all tissues, and then it's also helpful not just in constipation and hemorrhoids, but if there is any sort of congestion in the body, we're thinking about moving that energy out. So edema, congestive heart failure, and really helping to just get things moving, rebalancing vata in the body. So, of course, like I mentioned, we don't want to move the energy too strongly in pregnancy. If someone's dehydrated, or if they're really exhausted, really depleted, severe emaciation, then we're not thinking about moving things out so quickly. So, just be careful in that situation. So for the lower GI or colon, when we're thinking about vata, vata is of course air, and so gas and bloating, constipation, dryness is really big, and coldness, especially where I live, up in the mountains in New Mexico. It's not only really dry in New Mexico, but can be very cold. We see a lot of anxiety. It's the wind, right? Like your mind is moving everywhere, and it's kind of hard to stay stable. It can also be showing up as insomnia. And then when a person who has a vata imbalance sticks out their tongue, it will be dry. There can be cracks as well, and also trembling. So they literally don't have enough groundedness to keep their tongue out without having it tremble. So that's, kind of oversimplified tongue diagnosis, but you can look for that with patients. And also in the elderly population, that's the vata time of life. So we talk about when you're younger, you're sort of in the kapha time of life, right? Building and growing, and then you go through your 20s, 30s, 40s, and you're kind of in your pitta, you're driven, your career state, and just that's sort of that time of life. And then, as you get older, things tend to dry out a bit, and that's sort of the vata time of life. So oleation, Ayurveda loves oil. My joke is that they love oil in every orifice, but it's true. It's really helpful for grounding, and especially when people are dry. So here we are talking about the trifecta of TRIPHALA for GI, weight, and immune health. And so now that you are familiar with the different herbs, the amalaki, harataki, and bibataki, we can kind of talk more about what it does as a formula together. I did find a lot of research on the herbs as individuals, but I really wanted to kind of focus on the formula itself and what it does for the body. So as mentioned before, it balances all the doshas and the digestive fire, our Agni. And when we have strong Agni, we can handle anything, whether it's, you know, our food, maybe unique things that we're trying, energies in life that come, circumstances, relationships, everything. It's very important for metabolizing our experience. And I listened to this talk yesterday. There was a National Ayurvedic conference happening, and Deepak Chopra was talking, and he talked about reality is really just metabolism of experience, and everyone's experience is different, but it's our metabolism of it. How are we translating this reality and our life experiences? And I thought that that was really cool to think about. So how can we help our digestive fire and our ability to really digest life in a healthy way, in a spiritual way, so that we can continue our journeys here and be able to gain the most out of life? And so when we look at the overall properties, TRIPHALA is anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, immunomodulatory, so really helping to find homeostasis, not immune suppressant, not immune stimulant, but really modulating. The antioxidant properties, as mentioned in amla, but also all of the fruits have these antioxidant properties, these polyphenols, and there is the movement aspect, the gentle kind of fibrous fruit laxative properties. And then, so we look at clinical uses. Of course, constipation can be helpful. IBS and IBD, we'll talk a little bit more about IBS coming up here. Gingivitis, arthritis, any sort of itis where there's inflammation. Immune support, type 2 diabetes, so it helps to regulate blood sugar. And then integrative oncology, there's a lot of studies about its ability to protect from radiation and chemotherapy, but also anti-tumor properties. So we'll go a little bit more into that as well. So these are the main constituents. From one of the research studies, they kind of listed out the different constituents, and I thought it was kind of cool to see what these acids are doing and how they're affecting the body and what's been studied on those. And so gallic acid, chebulic acid, you know, they're really helping free radical scavenging, so decreasing free radicals and cell cytotoxicity, helping with vasculature, anti-inflammatory. The ellagic acid, maybe you've heard of before, it's neuroprotective. And then we have the tannins or the tannic acid, so it's very astringent and drying. Like when you eat something really sour and like your mouth kind of puckers up, that's sort of that tannin activity and drying. So it's helpful for tonifying tissues, specifically epithelial. So you can think about the, you know, a wound, not only like on the skin, but internally as well in the GI. And then ascorbic acid down here at the bottom, of course, is our vitamin C. And so really looking at just the antioxidant properties found in these fruits. So this was an overview of TRIPHALA'S therapeutic uses in research. And really it was looking for, of course, we talked about the laxative action, but really how it's helpful for stimulating appetite, reduction of hyperacidity. So once again, thinking about reflux or having sort of GERD and that imbalance in your stomach and esophagus, and helping to get that energy to move down and kind of neutralize the stomach acid. It's immunomodulating, as mentioned, antibacterial, adaptogenic, and also what I found interesting, so most of the things they talked about, I've mentioned about the effects of Triphala, but what was really interesting was that they talked about how the polyphenols in Triphala that actually help to modulate the gut microbiome. So we know how important the microbiome is, and it's coming up more and more and more in research about how it affects our brain health and just our entire system, inflammation and everything. So what they found was that the polyphenols actually helped to promote the growth of bifidobacteria, sorry, and lactobacillus. So we know that those are our kind of healthy probiotics, and they inhibited the growth of undesirable gut microbes. So if you're thinking about overgrowth of yeast or just other microbes that are not healthy for your GI or your entire body, it can be helpful. And then they mentioned Charak, which is a foundational text of Ayurveda, and how they, this is thousands of years old, but how he mentions in there that a Triphala rasayana, so specifically they mention using Triphala with honey and ghee daily, has the potential to make a person live for 100 years, devoid of old age and diseases. And so, I always like to think about this really modern wisdom and what's being used for centuries, and then how we're actually taking these same formulas and herbs and looking at it, in modern medicine and in science. And so that's kind of why I like to present on both of them. So this one was specifically a study for IBS, and I don't like how they abbreviate Triphala TLP because I want it to be TPL. But anyways, TLP is Triphala in this study. So they were looking at the components that were causing restoration of the epithelial lining in the GI, and how it exhibited mild laxative properties, and also facilitated passage of stool. So they were looking at the polyphenols, once again, vitamin C and flavonoids, to provide antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. And then the various acids that we just took a look at a little bit ago, and how they were cytoprotective, so really protecting the cells, and antifungal. So really, in conclusion, they talk about it holding potential in improving lower GI symptoms, and it may be a valuable and effective addition to standard treatment. And they mentioned alone or along with probiotics could also be helpful. So, just a note, they talked about a little bit, being careful of using it. There's different types of IBS, of course. You have IBS D, which is diarrhea, IBS C, constipation, or IBS, which is like mixed or alternating constipation and diarrhea. And so they talk about being careful using it with IBS-D because you don't want to create more diarrhea. And when I was learning about Triphala in school, it has so many great properties, and it's really adaptogenic to the body, that we were taught if you put Triphala in warm water, that it's going to help move things in the body. But if you were to do Triphala in cold water and you had diarrhea, that it would actually help to tonify and kind of slow things down a little bit. I have not personally put this to the test, but when I came across this study, I was remembering that and thinking, I wonder if it would make a difference how you took it, and if it could actually be helpful in diarrhea. So I'm going to reach out to my my mentors and ask them about some clinical case studies where they've maybe used it in diarrhea, because I am curious. It does have so many good properties for kind of tonifying and tightening of the tissues, and possibly slowing things down So maybe it's just what your body needs, and the wisdom of the herbs, they really do have the ability to adapt and know what's needed in the body to create a better homeostasis. So this is a diagram from that study, and it just kind of, once again, talks about the different um, constituents of the Harataki, Amalaki, Bibitaki, and then how it might be affecting the GI. So once again, we're decreasing inflammation, visceral sensitivity, GI infections. It's going to improve digestion and the motility of the GI. So getting things to move in a more balanced way. It's going to help the beneficial bacteria. And then when we're looking at it helping all of the doshas, we're looking at a decrease in anxiety and chronic stress. And because our gut is so connected to our brain, I could absolutely see how this could play into our mental state and our mood and our neurotransmitters. And, you know, if you don't go to the bathroom for a few days, you're kind of grumpy. Well, I don't know. I am. So anyways, we're going to move on here to TRIPHALA and weight management. So this was actually a study on mice. So it's always interesting. They made the mice fat. They they fed them a high fat diet, and what they were looking at, they had 42 mice, but they were looking at the high fat diet alone and what it would do to the body. And then they were looking at each herb. So we have Harataki, Bibitaki, and Amalaki with the high fat diet. And then they were also looking at what would happen if they were given the formula TRIPHALA. So what effects would it have on our blood glucose, our cholesterol, triglycerides. They looked at ALT, which is a liver enzyme, and they were doing blood samples throughout this study. So at 2, 4, 8, and 10 weeks. And then after the study was finished, they, of course, looked at the liver and the pathology and kind of what happened with these mice and the different groups for the high fat diet. So basically, every mouse group that had any herb or any fruit of Triphala, so Harataki, Bibitaki, or Amalaki, um, or Triphala itself, had significantly improved lipid profiles. So they were looking at total cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL, so that's sort of what we consider our bad cholesterol, and then HDL, which is, quote, our good one, even though it's a little bit more complicated than that. But there was improvements in all of those, as well as glucose levels, and also liver enzyme ALT. What was really interesting, though, is so when they went down to the cellular level and they looked at the liver, they found that the Triphala group specifically, there was a reverse in the pathological changes in the liver. So they were looking at fatty liver. And then also a decrease in the visceral adipose fat. So you can think about like in metabolic syndrome or just in general when there is, uh, extra fat around the midsection. We talk a lot about, it accumulating there, and then also how all of our organs are kind of wrapped in this or protected by the omentum, which is just kind of this fatty curtain that lays over our vital organs in our abdomen. And so they found a decrease in that as well. So this was a systematic review of the antioxidant, anti-diabetic, and anti-obesity effects and safety of Triphala. And so they actually reviewed 152 articles. I think when they did their first search, when they were looking for just Triphala and some of these key terms, they came up with over like 1,000 articles, but they weaned it down to 152. And they talk about how really how safe it is and the efficacy. And so when you're comparing it to maybe other options such as prescription drugs for IBS, or maybe anti-diabetic medications or over-the-counter laxatives, those sort of things. Then they were looking at really how safe and well tolerated Triphala is. I mean, it makes sense because it's just 3 fruits. So it's our bodies know how to utilize these fruits, and they're complex, and they're not just moving, in a laxative way. They're doing all these other things like regulating inflammation, which could be really the basis for a lot of the issues. As we know, chronic disease and inflammation are very much connected, and really sometimes this inflammation is the basis for lots of different health concerns. And so they talked about the different effects in vivo and in vitro. Of course, we've talked about these antioxidant properties, anti-hypercholesterolemic, so affecting cholesterol levels, anti-diabetic, anti-obesity, we just looked at that, chemopreventive and anti-mutagenic activity, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, radioprotective. So thinking about using these antioxidants if someone's going through radiation to kind of help protect the healthy cells in the body. And then immunomodulation, improving wound healing, enteroprotective, gastric ulcers, helping to heal those, and then nitric oxide scavenging activity. So really the conclusion was it has profound healing benefits in multi-organ systems. The Triphala is high in magnesium, potassium, calcium, iron, selenium, excuse me, and zinc. And it can be very helpful for scavenging nitric oxide. And so the study kind of claims that that's how they were able to explain the adaptogenic, rejuvenating, cardioprotective, and neuroprotective activities was because of this nitrous oxide scavenging. So thinking about what that does in the body and how it might be protective, this study was really looking at how we could boost the cell counts in HIV or AIDS. And so it was a small study, but it was human, and I always get excited when I can find human studies. And so this was really talking about the immunostimulatory effects on CD3 and CD8. So those are the cytotoxic T cells, CD3 negative and CD8 positive. And then the natural killer cells. So as you might know, natural killer cells are really our first line defense for abnormal cells in the body, and they go and they find them and they kill them. So it's important in cancer care, and also can be very helpful when there's an immunocompromised person, such as these individuals, and really helping to keep their immune system up and not having secondary infections. There were no changes in cytokines. So cytokines, you've probably been hearing a lot about cytokine storms and what happens. They're not all bad, but they do create some inflammation and sometimes an overreactive immune system. The best thing about this study, well, there's a lot of great things, but once again, all participants tolerated Triphala really well. So, when we're thinking about doing no harm and helping patients, it can be great when the therapies are well tolerated, they have no adverse effects, that sort of thing. And so it really talks about Triphala having immunostimulatory effects, and specifically these cells, and it increased the absolute number of the cells. And so they said it might provide a novel adjuvant therapy. So of course we're doing other things in every every situation with our patients, whether they have IBS or whether they have anxiety or whether they have constipation. It's, we're working on so many different levels. We're working on diet, we're working on lifestyle and hydration and movement and, the whole person. But Triphala can be a very good tool to have in your toolbox. And it has so many great health benefits that oftentimes when you work on that GI and get things moving in the right way and treating those doshas so they can go back to their homes in the GI and operate as they should, it can be helpful for so many things. So on a systemic level, it can be very helpful. And so I think about these patients who are probably pretty um, depleted, and how it might help not just with these cell counts, but also energy, and possibly ward off anything that could be detrimental to their immune systems and that sort of thing. So this is sort of the overview of that study and the cells that were being affected. So you can see they were only actually on TRIPHALA for 4 weeks. And these are the cell types that were being looked at. And so it didn't affect, all of them as great as the ones that were mentioned, but I like to see graphs because it just makes it easy when we're talking about these different cell types. And so, you can see the CD3 and CD8 and the effect that it had. And then, not so much a great effect on these other cell types, but they were checking, of course, the blood and looking at the lymphocytes in the blood. So then we have some anti-tumor properties. This study was specifically looking at cancer cells that were in the colon, so colorectal cancer cells, and really looking at the anti-tumor activities. So specifically, as you might remember, we talked about chebulinic acid and chebulagic acid, and then the other phenolic acids. And they were looking at kind of how that would play a role in the anti-tumor activities. So when we look at anti-tumor activities, we look at stopping proliferation, so stopping these cells from continuing to divide, because that's what cancer is just sort of rapid unmediated cell division. And so also they looked at apoptosis, so pro-apoptotic events, which really means cell death. So is it helping these cells that are acting unruly to kill them, to create cell death in those cells that were bad? And then also migration, so anti-migratory activities. And that really helps because, that's what cancer wants to do. It wants to proliferate, and then it wants to spread into lots of other places in your body through the lymph and through the blood, and, our channels that are easily available to it. So how was the TRIPHALA, and specifically those acids of TRIPHALA, helping to mitigate these, behaviors from cancer? So they looked at the chebulinic acid and found that it wasn't the only critical component, but also, um, that we're looking at the chebulagic acid and kind of the whole profile. So all of these different phenolics helping, really being a multi-target anti-tumor agent with a therapeutic potential. So helping on all of those different levels, as I just mentioned. And for me, it's always helpful to look at diagrams because it gets complicated, and there's so many, right? Like when we're learning about immunology and the cytokines and the different cell types and how are we affecting these pathways, and it gets really complicated. So I was really grateful to find this diagram because it was specifically talking about how the pathway was being inhibited and what the end result was. So when we're thinking about this cellular replication, duplication, the growing of cells, it's that DNA transcription, RNA, and what's happening there that is allowing for the cells to multiply. And so as you can see, that this diagram has all of these different pathways, and you can look at where in the pathway is it inhibiting so that you're not going to get this transcription of more cells, this transcription of, the ability to duplicate. And so in the previous study that we were just talking about, they found that the anti-neoplastic properties, um, including anti-proliferation, pro-apoptosis, so cell death, and anti-migration activities, were associated with the P13K/AKT and MAPK or ERK pathways. And so if you look, we have the I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. Let me, okay. So we're looking right here. And so if you're basically, inhibiting things right here, you're not going to continue down, because then it talks about AKT inhibitors. So once again, you're stopping the pathway, and not going down to transcription. The other pathway it was working on was the MAPK, ERK, and so that is right here. And so you can see MAP2K1, and basically if you're inhibiting here and inhibiting here, once again, you're not getting transcription, so that you're basically stopping cell proliferation, causing cell death, that's, programmed inside of it. And then if you're not, allowing cells to duplicate, then you're not having that migration effect as well that's happening. And so that's sort of that piece. And then this also talks about the TRIPHALA in the same manner as well, the ERK, and how it's helping specifically pancreatic tumor cells. And I have a patient right now battling pancreatic cancer, and it's a really scary diagnosis. And so I was grateful to find this, because not only does it talk about treatment of these pancreatic cells, but also prevention. So if you know that there is a family history, it can be helpful for prevention as well. They talk about the TRIPHALA-induced apoptosis, so cell death was linked with phosphorylation of the P53 and ERK. So once again, that pathway that we just looked at, the ERK pathway. And then also, they looked at a few different cell lines of pancreatic tumors in this study and found that it was, TRIPHALA was really helpful in producing cell death of the cancer cells. What was really great was that it failed to induce apoptosis or activate the ERK or P53 in normal human pancreatic ductal epithelial cells, so the HPDE6 cells. So if you think about that, it has the ability to find cells that are acting unruly and take care of them. It's not going to harm your healthy, good cells. And I think that's really an important thing to consider, for taking anything, is could it be affecting my healthy cells? And so I love that they looked at the cell lines, so just specific, TRIPHALA with the cells. And then they also looked at mice, and looked at the increased cell death in the tumor cells. And once again, that was because of the P53 and ERK. So, they said that it was helpful for inhibiting the growth of human pancreatic cells in both cellular and in vivo model. And it suggests that the growth inhibitory effects is mediated by those pathways and shows potential for the treatment and or prevention of human pancreatic cancer. And so in integrative medicine, we love prevention, and anything we can do to help individuals feel like they're doing something, especially if there is family history or maybe history of pancreatitis, and how can we help with any sort of reactive oxygen species and, any sort of toxicity that might be happening, especially, with the beta cells in the pancreas and diabetes, insulin, the whole kind of GI system is what we're looking at, not just the stomach and small intestine and large intestine, but all of the GI. So looking at the pancreas and how we can help protect it, and looking at the liver and how we can help really with regeneration and increasing our detoxification pathways and really supporting the entire GI. And that is kind of, obviously going to help us feel better, with prevention as well as treatment, and with the GI affecting our mental state and helping patients to the best of our ability is always what we're aiming to do. So this was kind of cool. I have recommended this actually quite a bit for patients who have any sort of we went through the entire GI, but I didn't want to forget about the mouth. And it is also, Triphala can be used as a mouthwash. You can actually swish with it and then you can swallow it and get all the benefits. But it can be really helpful for gingivitis, periodontal disease. So, you can just tell patients to mix it with water and then swish it and swallow it, before bed. But if they have an active infection, I would recommend spitting it out. So you don't want to, have that be swallowed and create any sort of GI upset or anything like that. So this study was specifically looking at the antimicrobial properties. The different research studies they found were Candida and Streptococcus. And so looking at the antimicrobial, you can think about, so killing anything that's creating gingivitis or inflammation of the gums, periodontal disease, it's getting kind of deeper into the tissue. This can be really helpful. It's going to be balancing for the bacteria, tonifying for the tissue, so tightening, um, stimulates the immune system, locally to kind of help, and then really decreasing inflammation. And so that's why it can be really, really helpful for any sort of imbalance in that area. And then useful in cavities as well. So they also mentioned a root canal irrigant. So the study was from India, and they talked about how, there are other treatment options out there, but they're not super cost effective and maybe they have side effects. And so we want to think about, once again, the safest route, the most effective route, and not having it be possibly breaking someone's wallet, or maybe they don't have insurance, or who knows. So, just thinking about the various uses, like I said, from mouth to anus, because that's really what I think about when I think about Triphala and all the different properties that it holds. So, okay, here, and then these are my resources, and so most of the studies are full text. I will, like I said, send you my slides, and then, we can absolutely be in touch. If you have a specific case studies that you're wondering if it might be helpful for Triphala to be, um, you know, if you want to experiment with you, not experiment, but if you think it might be helpful for your patients and you're curious specifically about dosage or that sort of thing, I'm happy to always talk about case studies. And I love working with integrative healthcare practitioners and just collaborating and, being able to help more people. So let me go ahead and Thank you so much for being here. We have about 5 minutes, so I would be happy to answer any questions you might have and, be able to just, like I said, talk more specifically about, patients and, case studies if you guys have any questions. I see a question from Renee, which is, what's the recommended dose of TRIPHALA, both for prevention or rehabilitation or for a specific disease process like pancreatic or colon cancer? So for prevention, I like using Trifala at bedtime. And, not all formulas are created equally. So as you know, this is a sponsored webinar by Rebel Herbs. Their formulas tend to be very potent because of the extraction methods. And so, with my patients, I only have to use one capsule at nighttime or maybe two if there is constipation or like a vata imbalance, to be able to get things moving. But every formula is different. We would normally say if it's just the ground up powders of like 5 grams throughout the day would be good. Sometimes patients will take it with each meal. It just kind of depends on the person, but I would think about that as sort of a tonic or prevention. Also rehabilitation, it just kind of depends on what the patient's going through, what they might need, what their dosha or constitution is, but those doses I would consider pretty similar, prevention and rehabilitation. Um, Specific disease process like pancreatic or colon cancer, I would probably think about not just doing it at nighttime. I would think about doing it with each meal. And, it kind of depends on what other treatments they're going through. So specifically, if they're going through any sort of chemo or radiation, you might want to think about having Triphala in the system, so taking it more often, so that it's in the system as a protective agent in smaller doses, as opposed to taking it, less often and in larger doses. So I think of Triphala, as I said, as a food. And so I would probably start with someone who has active pancreatic or colon cancer. I would be doing other things, of course, too, and it depends on their Western treatment and, contraindications and all of that. But probably taking, if it was Rebel Herbs capsules, one capsule with each meal, and maybe an extra one at night. But if you get loose stools, you back off. And then I would be thinking about, with another formula or something, if they wanted to do a powder, what might they mix it in? So in Ayurvedic medicine, and you could always take the capsules and open them up, and take it that way. It's just Triphala is very astringent and kind of sour, and most Americans don't like that. So, um, you could always have them mix it in a little bit of honey, or if they have a lot of inflammation like reflux, we talk a lot about using aloe gel as a anupan, or something that you mix the medicine into. And you can also just do water. If you're trying to rebuild somebody, Ayurvedic medicine likes to use milk a lot because it's sort of this rebuilding. If they're dairy intolerant, and our sourcing is not as great, right? Oh, they have the A2 cows in India, and it's just different. So, nut milk and that sort of thing can also be helpful if there's like a vata imbalance. But I would think about, for any sort of cancer, a more regular exposure to Triphala at smaller doses throughout the day. And really, it's sort of like how we prescribe magnesium in some ways, where it's to bowel tolerance, or vitamin C to bowel tolerance, because our bodies will tell us like, oh, this is too much, so we've got to be careful. And so with cancer in general, we have a lot of studies coming out, and we're doing a study with uh, some college, I can't remember, is it Cornell? Anyways, there's a big college we're doing a study with right now, on our neem and cancer. So I think the combo of those, the neem or immunade plus Triphala, but specifically for colon cancer and pancreatic cancer would be a powerful combo. There are a few more questions. Production of lipase and digestive enzymes in pancreas. Would you use TRIPHALA to balance the secretions? I think it could be really helpful to balance the secretions. You know, the formula is food, really, it's fruits. And so in some ways it's going to help to kind of get things flowing and moving and balance that out. And as we know, it can affect blood sugar. And so, you know, helping the secretions, the digestive fire, all of those things, I would absolutely think about it being used for that. Yes, if it's not enough, like if people need help with their enzymes and secretions. So can you briefly compare Triphala to Chyawanprash? So Triphala is just the three fruits we talked about. Chyawanprash is more than that. It has a lot of different components in it, but it often has Triphala in it. And so Chyawanprash I would think about as sort of a daily tonic as well for the immune system, for GI health, for all of those things, but it's going to have a bit more adaptogens in it, helpful for the nervous system, stress, anxiety, that sort of thing. But oftentimes, most Chyawanprash formulas I've seen actually have Triphala in it. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. Where Triphala, you know, you might be taking it with each meal or just at bedtime. Chyawanprash, usually I've seen it just dosed like once a day, or you can put it on toast. You know, it's kind of like this really thick jam sort of thing. If you were to use Triphala prophylactically, for how long would you use it? A couple of weeks? I would say it depends on what you're treating prophylactically. Um, it's more of a tonic. It's more of a like part of your everyday regimen. There's very few people I would say could not benefit from using Triphala on a daily basis, even if it's a very small amount. Like I said before, you want to kind of avoid in pregnancy, but other than that, it can be so helpful for just daily tonification of the GI and prevention and immune modulation and inflammation modulation. And so, you know, if you're wanting to use it specifically prophylactically in a condition, let me know. But I think it can be used prophylactically by just taking it as a daily tonic for so many different conditions. So that's kind of how I look at it, as almost a daily friend or a food that you're incorporating for your immune system and for your GI health. And is Rebel Herbs on Fullscript or Emerson? We're actually on both. Fullscript, Emerson, we're on Natural Partners. We just started doing drop shipping to your patients. So if you, I know it's a weird time with COVID-19 and a lot of people are doing virtual consults, you can also place orders just and do drop shipping as well. So I saw a study on Chabulic myrobalan about its antiviral activity. Yeah, it's so great for so many things. I just did a whole immune webinar on the antiviral properties of a lot of different herbs. And so I would love to see that study. I don't think I came across that one when I was looking, but I was looking at mostly Triphala as a whole. And so, you know, but if we're thinking about it, right now is a great time for immune modulation and helping to just keep things moving in the right direction and keep our mental state happy through our GI and balancing all of those doshas. And you know, if you guys have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll make sure to pull all of your emails and send you the slides as a PDF. And then if you want to rewatch anything or get CE credits for any of the other webinars we've done, they're all on rebelherbs.com under videos, and you can still get PACE credits for Ayurvedic practitioners and CE credits for naturopathic doctors from the AANP just by listening to the pre-recorded webinars. So I look forward to seeing you next month, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon or evening wherever you are. And thank you just once again for joining me today and learning about Triphala. Okay, bye.